The sunlight slipped through the blinds in Joon-woo's cramped apartment, casting soft, uneven shadows over his gaming setup. He rubbed his eyes and stared at the monitor, fingers flying across the keyboard in rhythmic clicks. It was just another ordinary day for him, a day filled with video games, streaming, and isolation from the outside world. He hadn't seen much of the world outside lately. Why bother? Everything he needed was within arm's reach: his PC, a refrigerator stocked with instant noodles, and the comforting glow of a virtual battlefield. He preferred it that way, away from the noise of the bustling streets of Seoul and the expectations of his parents. He could already hear his mother's voice nagging him to get out more, to make something of himself. But Joon-woo had a plan: grow his streaming audience, and maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to worry about any of that. His fingers danced over the keyboard as his character in-game sprinted through a war-torn cityscape. Gunfire echoed through his headset, and his concentration narrowed, shutting out the rest of the world. That is, until a jarring notification popped up on his phone. Emergency alert. Mysterious infection spreading rapidly throughout Seoul. Citizens advised to remain indoors. Joon-woo glanced at the message, frowning. Another prank alert, he muttered under his breath. The government alert system had a tendency to go off too often. He shook his head, brushing it aside. His phone buzzed again, this time flashing with a flood of texts from his mother and sister. Mom. Joon-woo, are you home? Please tell me you're safe. Sister. Get to a safe place, Oppa. Something crazy is happening. A knot formed in his stomach. Their texts weren't normal. They were panicked. This was different. He stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the city. What he saw made his blood run cold. The streets below were in chaos. Cars were abandoned, doors flung open as people sprinted in every direction. Smoke billowed from a nearby building, dark tendrils rising into the sky. Joon-woo squinted, trying to make sense of the scene unfolding below. That's when he saw them, people, or at least, they used to be people, stumbling around, their movements unnatural, jerking. And then, one lunged at a passerby, sinking its teeth into the man's neck. Joon-woo stumbled backward, his heart racing. What the hell? The screams from below pierced the glass of his window. He backed away, his mind spinning. Infected, zombies. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. He snatched his phone off the desk, his hands shaking as he dialed his mother. The line rang once, twice, no answer. He tried again, this time with his sister's number. Again, no response. Joon-woo's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the notifications on his phone explode. Social media, text alerts, news outlets, flooding with stories of an outbreak, of people turning into violent, bloodthirsty creatures. Another explosion rocked the street below, and this time, Joon-woo felt it. The ground beneath him trembled, and the power flickered for a moment. He glanced at his PC, the once comforting hum of the fans now seeming eerily loud in the silence that followed. The world outside was descending into madness, and he was trapped. Alone. His apartment, once a safe haven, now felt like a prison. The only comfort he had left was the thin walls, the lock on his door, and the hope that his family would come home soon. Hours passed. Joon-woo paced the apartment, watching the scenes of carnage unfold from his window. The streets were nearly empty now, except for the infected. They roamed aimlessly, some with blood-stained clothes, others gnawing on lifeless bodies. He could hear faint groans and guttural growls from down below, a sound that made his skin crawl. At some point, he realized how hungry he was. He moved to the kitchen, ripping open a pack of instant noodles. He poured hot water from the electric kettle into the cup, waiting as the noodles softened. The silence in the room was suffocating, interrupted only by the distant sounds of terror from the streets below. Suddenly, a loud banging echoed from the hallway outside his apartment. Joon-woo froze, his hand halfway to his mouth with a forkful of noodles. The banging came again, more frantic this time, as though someone, or something, was trying to get in. He dropped the fork and crept toward the door, his breath shallow. His mind raced with fear and irrational hope. Maybe it was his mother, his sister, someone he knew. He pressed his ear against the door. "Please, please let me in," a voice whimpered from the other side. It was a woman, her voice thick with fear and desperation. "They're coming, please." Joon-woo's heart twisted. He stared at the door handle, torn between opening it and leaving the woman to her fate. He didn't know what was out there, and he didn't know if he could risk it. Suddenly, the woman screamed, and the sound of shuffling feet, too many feet, reached his ears. He backed away from the door as the pounding grew louder, more chaotic. The woman's voice was cut off by a sickening, wet sound, and then there was silence. Joon-woo's stomach turned. He backed away from the door, his legs shaking, his mind trying to process what had just happened. He was alone again, but now the reality of his isolation hit harder. There would be no help coming. Not soon, maybe not ever. His eyes darted to the barricade he'd hastily created against his door, his desk, some chairs, anything he could find. But was it enough? After realizing the gravity of the situation outside his apartment, Joon-woo begins a period of entrapment, barricading himself in his small, cramped home. At first, there is a spark of hope, the idea that this crisis might be over in a few days. He keeps checking his phone, expecting news of rescue or a text from his family telling him they're okay. But the comforting connection with the outside world slowly deteriorates as networks fail, power outages occur, and food runs low. Initially, Joon-woo maintains his hope for a quick resolution. He sets up simple barricades, stacking furniture against his door. Through his window, he watches the once familiar neighborhood plunge into chaos. People scream in panic, buildings burn, and the streets are flooded with zombies that stagger toward any sound or movement. Through his smartphone, Joon-woo keeps an eye on social media and watches breaking news on the television. He learns about the infection's rapid spread, a virus that turns people into violent, mindless zombies. But the news is bleak. Government messages urge people to stay indoors, promising that help is coming. He tries to call his parents, but the signal is patchy, and the calls don't go through. Messages to friends remain unread. The passing days become a blur, and Joon-woo's mood begins to darken. His supply of instant ramen, snacks, and bottled water starts to dwindle. Power outages make it difficult to store or cook food. Worse, without reliable electricity, his internet connection begins to falter. Social media feeds are filled with terrifying videos of people being chased and attacked, of entire cities overrun with zombies. There is no news of his family. Joon-woo's apartment feels like a tomb. The silence in the moments between zombie howls is suffocating. From his window, he sees neighbors trying to escape their own apartments, only to be overwhelmed by the infected. He is forced to listen as the once normal people he knew become victims. In a particularly haunting moment, Joon-woo watches a neighbor who had survived for days finally crack under the pressure. The man leaves his barricade and rushes into the hallway, screaming for help. Joon-woo watches helplessly as he's swarmed by a pack of zombies, their guttural groans filling the air. The sight leaves him shaken and numb. Joon-woo begins rationing his food and water. He carefully calculates how long he can survive with what he has, realizing it might not be enough. His world shrinks to the confines of his apartment as he moves between his bedroom, kitchen, and small living room. Time blurs, and Joon-woo loses track of the days. He distracts himself by playing video games when the power is still on, but the usual comfort they once brought him fades. The noise of gunfire in the game begins to blur with the sounds outside his window, zombies crashing through doors, screams echoing through the apartment complex. Every time the power flickers, he is reminded of how fragile his situation is. The apartment's claustrophobia seeps into his mind. The once familiar space begins to feel like a prison, and Joon-woo starts hallucinating from the prolonged isolation. He imagines hearing his parents' voices, their laughter, and footsteps in the hallway. At times, he almost opens the door, desperate for human contact, only to catch himself at the last second, realizing the deadly risk outside. His mental state deteriorates further when he starts having vivid nightmares of becoming infected, of losing control and attacking others. He wakes up in cold sweats, his heart pounding. The line between reality and nightmare blurs. By this point, Joon-woo is barely holding on. His apartment has become filthy, trash piling up in corners as he loses the will to maintain any semblance of normalcy. The stench of rotting food in his fridge, now useless due to the power failures, fills the apartment. He feels lethargic, unshaven, and gaunt from lack of proper nutrition. His phone battery, which he conserves desperately, becomes a symbol of his connection to the outside world. He spends hours staring at the black screen, occasionally turning it on to check for messages. He still clings to the hope that his family might be alive, but as time stretches on, the hope dwindles. His mind is filled with dark thoughts, questions of whether survival is even worth it. The constant threat of zombies lurking outside takes a toll on his nerves. He hears them scratching at his door at night, moaning, and sniffing the air. The sounds are maddening, but they are also a cruel reminder that he's alive and they are not. He starts talking to himself, mumbling under his breath to keep some sense of sanity. The days stretch into an oppressive monotony of fear, hunger, and isolation. Joon-woo begins to contemplate the unthinkable, ending it all. His mental health has deteriorated to the point where the idea of jumping from his balcony becomes a haunting temptation. The height becomes a dark fascination, a possible way to escape his living nightmare. On the 21st day, just as Joon-woo is about to give into despair, a new sound breaks through the silence, a drone buzzing outside his window. It hovers nearby, carrying a small note attached. Curiosity draws him closer, and as he peers out, he sees something he hasn't seen in weeks, another survivor. Across the street, in an adjacent building, he locks eyes with a young woman signaling him. For the first time in weeks, Joon-woo feels something stir within him, hope.